That's all.
Actually, I told her to.
Please be seated.
Can everyone hear me online? If you can, please show me a thumbs up. Right. Welcome, everyone. Hello. Welcome to Choe Khor Sum Ling this Sunday for the first of a 9-week teaching for students who are beginners, intermediates, and advanced in Buddhist Meditation and Philosophy based on the model of the Lamrim. And we're very, very happy that we have with us Venerable Legden to start this teaching. For those of you who don't know, Venerable Legden is a student of Buddhist philosophy from the Seraji Monastery. And Venerable Legden and other monks who visit us from Bailkupe are very kind to give us their time as students to come here and teach us and lead us through the Dharma teachings over the weekends. And we are very, very grateful for you, Venerable. The teachings will be recorded, and those of you who want a copy will also find this online after the teachings. We can start, Venerable. Thank you.
Is this recording?
Yes.
Morning, everyone. So as was mentioned, this series is going to be an introduction to Buddhist philosophy and meditation. Let's start by setting a strong motivation. We've come together to study the teachings of the Buddha, to learn how to put into practice all of the instructions and the realizations that the Buddha has offered us. We do this not for ourselves alone, for our mere benefit, not to make our lives happier or more comfortable, but we do it so that we might be able to be of more service to others in this life and in all future lives, that we might help alleviate the suffering of others. If our own lives become more comfortable, more relaxed, more open as a result, we can appreciate that. But the goal of our study and our practice is to be of service to others. And so letting that be our strong motivation, let's just begin with a few opening prayers. We'll start with refuge on page 34. And so we'll just do the short prayers that we usually do. So we'll do refuge and bodhicitta 3 times in Tibetan, once in English. The 4 immeasurables 3 times in English, the 7-limb prayer and the short mandala offering. And we'll do all those in English. And, you know, for the mandala offering, for those who don't know, so a mandala is a representation of the whole world system, right? And so when we make a mandala offering, what we're offering is all that exists, both real and imagined. And in this case, we're offering it to the Buddha, or to all the Buddhas. The Buddha field this says, to all the Buddhas. And we do it as part of our, in general, you do it before a teaching as part of your requesting the teachings from whoever is giving them, but also to all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas to request their blessings. And so you may see people have done physical mandalas. They're usually large metal structures that are filled with stones and gems and jewels, and they build up all the 7 layers. If you don't have one of those, we do one with our hands. And so the mandala mudra, they say, it takes a while to get used to it, but your 2 ring fingers are back to back. Your pinkies hook on each other, right? Your ring fingers are back to back, and these fingers grab each other like this. So your thumbs grab your pinkies, and your 4 fingers grab your middle fingers, with the ring fingers together. You don't have to worry about it. We can practice it later. But just so you know what this is, in Buddhist cosmology, we say that Mount Meru is the kind of center of existence. And then there are 4 small mountains that surround it. So in this cosmology, our ring fingers are representing Mount Meru. And each of these 4 are representing the 4 other smaller mountains that surround Mount Meru. Right? The 4 islands are sometimes called the great continents, you know. When you do the long mandala offering, what's called the 37 heap offering, it lists out all of the different continents and then the subcontinents and all the different kind of celestial or magical beings that you make offerings to. And actually, Venerable Namjong just translated a commentary on the 37 mandala practice, which is very nice. It's in the process of being, I helped edit it. It's in the process of being published right now. But so that's what we're doing. If you see me grab and do this with my hands, that's what it is. Once you learn how to do it, it's very easy. The one thing to know is if you offer a mandala, you should never offer an empty mandala. You should always have some sort of offering. So if you don't have an offering, that's when we use our mala. And so our mala serves as our offering. So if I don't have even a grain of rice or something else, the mala serves as the offering that's filling up the mandala that I'm offering to all Buddhists. So that is what this is, okay? So you don't have to worry about it now, but I know that some people, you haven't seen it before, it looks a little strange, right? So that's what that is.
Benjamin, do you want it to switch on the fan?
Yeah, sure.
If it were-
It's a little warm. Okay. So we'll begin, like I said, with refuge and bodhicitta and go from there. Sangye cheran soki chonam la jancho baru dagni kyapsu chi dagi jinsogi pe sonam gi drola penche sangye dru parsho sangye cheran soki chonam la jancho baru dagni kyapsu chi dagi jinsogi pe sonam gi drola penche sangye dru parsho Sangye Shridam Soki Chonam La Jantum Baru Dagni Kyapsu Chi Dangi Jinsogi Pe Sonam Gi Drola Pinchir Sangye Dru Parshok. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Reverently, I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginning this time and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the 4 continents, the sun, and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kamniyatayami. I will continue with the praise to Shakyamuni Buddha on page 73. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When, O supreme amongst humans, you were born on this earth, you paced out 7 strides and then said, I'm supreme in this world. To you who are wise then, I prostrate. With pure bodies, form supremely pure, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best, Lord, to you I prostrate. With the supreme signs, face like spotless moon, color like gold, to you I prostrate. Dust free like you, the 3 worlds are not, incomparably wise one, to you I prostrate. The Savior, having great compassion, the Founder, having all understanding, the field of merit with qualities like a vast ocean, to you, the one gone to thusness, I prostrate. The purity that frees one from attachment, the virtue that frees one from the lower realms, the one path, the sublime pure reality, to the Dharma that pacifies, I prostrate. Those who are liberated and who also show the path to liberation, the holy fields qualified with realizations, who are devoted to the moral precepts, to you, the sublime community intending virtue, I prostrate. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all 3 ever devout homage, to all worthy of respect, bound with bodies as many as all realms, atoms in all aspects, with supreme faith I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions, subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a visual aberration, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see conditioned things as such. Through these merits may sentient beings attain the rank of seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. Great. Thank you. So, as we begin the series, I think it's always useful to remind ourselves, whenever we approach a new topic, or not a new topic, any topic of study or practice, we want to avoid having the 3 faults of a vessel, it's how they're called, a vessel or a pot, like a water carrying pot. And so those 3 faults, we don't want to be like a pot that is upside down. So a pot that is upside down, no matter how much water you pour, it'll never be filled, right? So in the same way, we don't want to come into a topic, whether it's one that we're studying new or one we've studied many times, or practice for that matter, with a closed mind to say, I don't need to worry about this, I already know it. So we don't want to have a closed mind. We don't want to be non-receptive. We also don't want to be like a pot that has a crack in it. So no matter how much water we pour in, it just spills out. So for us, that means we want to strive to have some level of attentiveness and mindfulness to our teaching, to not be distracted, to keep our minds focused on what we're doing. We want to be present in the teaching. So we don't want to be like a pot with a crack. And lastly, we want to not be like a pot that is stained on the inside, that has some residue, especially if they say residue of poison. So no matter how much pure water you were to pour into it, it's all going to be polluted by whatever residue hasn't been cleaned out. And in the same way, we don't want to have our own presuppositions or our own preconceptions coming into a topic. We want to be completely open-minded. This doesn't mean we aren't skeptical. It doesn't mean you take everything at face value, right? But it means that you give the teachings the benefit of the doubt. And then when you approach them, if something about them feels a little difficult for you, then you can analyze it and ask questions and grow, but you don't go in with the idea that with these presuppositions like that. It's always important for me to remember these, especially the, well, all of them are important. But when I'm reviewing a topic, you know, if I go to a teaching, regardless of the teacher, and they're giving a topic that I've studied many, many times, it's very easy to be like, well, I already know this topic. I've already studied this. So I don't have anything to gain from this. So I'm just here for the vibes, that kind of idea sometimes. Especially, you know, if this one gives a teaching on the Four Noble Truths or on refuge or on something that's beginner level, I'm going to go. But you have to not do it with the mindset that says, I already know this. Because once you have that mindset, then you've blocked yourself off from growing. There's always ways to deepen your practice and your study, even if it's a topic you've studied many, many times. So by trying to avoid the three faults of a faulty or broken vessel or pot, then we can keep our minds open and receptive to gain something out of every interaction with the Dharma, with every practice and teaching. So let's start by trying to remember those three. And I add on to them the three attitudes with which we approach study, especially Lamrim study, as Captain Lama Tsongkhapa reminds us, is that we want to approach study with an attitude that recognizes the long view or the big picture. It recognizes that there's a lot to study between now and Buddhahood, that the practice isn't going to come immediately. We want to have an attitude that's known as the expansive attitude, or the attitude that recognizes there are many different bits and pieces to study, that it isn't one topic that will get you to Buddhahood. And so what we're doing when we practice and study is taking a small amount and incorporating that into a larger whole. And then we want to have the relaxed attitude, the attitude that says, yes, I need to push myself. Yes, I need to grow. I need to work to be a better person, but I don't have to do it overnight. I'm not going to become perfect by tomorrow because I am a samsaric being doing the best I can. So we have to have a level of relaxation that that causes us not to stress out or become overwhelmed. Okay. So I begin every teaching with these priorities because I think they're important. And I think they make our experiences of the teaching more profound if we can keep these three attitudes at the front of our mind, and we can do our best to avoid the three faults. So this course is an introduction to Buddhist meditation and philosophy. And so many of you will have heard many of these topics already, okay? Which is another reason I emphasize the three attitudes and the three faults, because I'm probably going to be saying things that some of you have heard before. Hopefully there's still something to get out of it, right? That's why we're coming together to do this. And there'll be repetition. That's how these things go. The way we've structured this course is based on the most recent 10-day retreat I led, like an introduction to Buddhism retreat. So we're kind of working it out as we go, because it's different doing 10 days worth of practice in a row versus spaced out over 10 weeks or 9 weeks. So if the subjects seem a little disconnected, they all fit together, I promise. But sometimes it might feel that way just because we have a greater length of time between our sessions, okay? So with this course, the question is, why do we need to have a course that explores both philosophy and meditation? And I think the reason is that one without the other is an incomplete picture, right? There are lots of types of meditation, Buddhist and non-Buddhist. And there's definitely benefit from any type of meditation, or there can be benefit. But when you take that meditation and you combine it with Buddhist philosophy, then what you do is you take the philosophy, which is teaching you about the nature of reality and how to exist in the world, and you're making it inseparable from your own mind, right? So you're taking a way of understanding experience and you're making it personal. So it's going from the outside in. If it's just this random meditation that's meant to calm you down or relax you, okay, we need that because the world is chaotic, right? I'm not going to say it's a bad thing, but it's not accessing the full potential of meditation practice. It's just the surface. I think a lot of people, especially in the West, I don't think this is as much of a thing in India because the idea of religion is a little broader. But in the West, people, especially new converts to Buddhism, don't like thinking of Buddhism as a religion. They say, oh no, I like Buddhist philosophical ideas and I like Buddhist meditation, but it's not a religion for me because they have very narrow views of what religion is, right? And because I think many convert Buddhists are kind of scarred by the religious institutions that they came from. And so they want to distance themselves from that. And I appreciate that. I understand that. I think in India, the recognition that religion and culture and habit overlap in ways that many Westerners try to divide, So maybe it's not as big of an obstacle here. But for me, understanding Buddhism is more than just a philosophical system, but as a religion, right? And by religion, I mean something that combines an understanding of the nature of reality with a practice to take that transcendent nature and make it personal, with individuals who are held up to help share and teach and promote that practice. So a cultural institution, as well as a philosophical institution, as well as a series of practice. That's what I mean by religion. All these things have to combine. And by combining, there's more benefit, right? Whether it gets the label of religion or not is incidental. It doesn't matter. But recognizing that it's not just some dry philosophy. It's not the same as reading Hegel or Wittgenstein or Plato or things like this. It's just something that we're actually applying into our lives. So as we begin this course, I think it's important for all of us that are part of it to think of what are our goals in being part of a course like this. When you want to study the Dharma, what do we really have as our goals? And we talk about motivation. We try to set what we call a Mahayana motivation or a Bodhicitta motivation, that everything we do is for the benefit of others. So every improvement to our lives, everything we do that makes our lives more comfortable or easier or removes obstacles to our minds, to our practice, we don't do it just for ourselves, but we do it for others. That's the ideal Mahayana motivation. But we have to think that's true in a very non-tangential, in a very ethereal kind of way. But for some of us, we come from, at least I'll say for me, when I first found Buddhism, I was angry at religion in general. I was very cynical. I grew up thinking religion, I didn't grow up thinking this, but I came to the decision that religion was only used to control people and abuse people, which is why I decided to study religion in college, because I thought I was smarter than it and I'd show everyone how wrong it was. I was very heavy, a hot-headed 18-year-old. Very bad reason to do anything, that cynical attitude, but that's what it was. At the same time, I felt like I was missing something in my life. A good friend of mine died, and I spoke at his funeral or his memorial service, and I realized I didn't have the language to navigate my grief and my loss and my sorrow because I had pushed all religious ideas away so far. So I was studying religion, and when I started studying Buddhism in an introductory way, in an academic way, it felt like coming home to something that I didn't know I'd left, right? And so I first started studying Buddhism to try to understand who I was, to understand how I could exist in the world. It wasn't this grand idea of wanting to become Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. It's because I was unhappy. I was angry. I was an unhappy person. And I found my study of Buddhism relieved that, right? So that's a small motivation. That's not the motivation we try to cultivate, but it was genuine. And it got me studying. So that's a valid motivation, right? To want to be free from suffering is a valid motivation. That's renunciation. That's self-compassion. It's not the ideal motivation, but it's a good place to start, right? It's what we build off of. So when you're engaging in study and practice, and when you're part of a course like this, think, what are my goals? Both my short-term goals and my long-term goals from studying Buddhism, practicing the Dharma. I think it's just an important thing to come to mind, because if you don't have a clear idea of what your goals are, you'll never get closer to achieving them, right? And if you do realize that your goals are maybe a little smaller than they need to be, then you can appreciate that and try to broaden them to be more expansive, right? So we don't have to go around and all of you answer why you're here, but it's a good thing to think about. Why do I choose to come? Why do I choose to be part of a program like this? So I thought we'd begin after I just had this whole spiel about Buddhism being more than meditation with an introduction to what is meditation. So, what is the goal of meditation, both in the short term and the long term? I think what's important and what helps me understand it is that in Tibetan, the word for meditation is gom, which means to become familiar with something. We use it in other circumstances as well. It's not unique to meditation. So when you become familiar with something, what you do is you make that thing inseparable from your mind. And so when we're meditating, we're focused on internal phenomena. We're becoming familiar with our minds. We're understanding how our minds work. We're understanding how our emotions work, how our aspirations exist in our mental continuum. So by meditating, we're becoming familiar with ourselves in a way that we aren't before, that we're disconnected. So meditation is a way to connect us to ourselves, but also connect us to a tradition that's bigger than us, a tradition that encompasses all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So the goal of meditation should never be just to calm down, just to relax, right? It can do that for you when you're overwhelmed and you're stressed and you just, let's say you're at work or you're at school or somewhere and things are coming at you from all sides, and you just take 2 minutes to do a brief 2-minute meditation to center yourself. That can relax you, that can center you. That's useful as a tool or a technology, but that's not the goal of meditation. So if you use it that way, that's okay. But realize that is a very small usage. When you do that, if you do it with the mindset that says, right now, everything is overwhelming, so I'm not acting with an intelligent mind, I'm reacting to these adverse conditions from like a monkey mind that's just blindly lashing out, then that meditation is more than just relaxation. It's more than just chilling out. What it's doing is allowing you to secure some sort of control over who you are and how you exist in the world, right? So the mindset that goes into meditation and what the goal is important. It's not just to relax. It's not just to check out. It's not just to zone out, but it's to learn something about yourself in such a way that you can be more beneficial to others and to yourself. And that's why meditation is important as a consistent practice, not something you do once or twice. Because if you don't do it repeatedly, then, or when you do it repeatedly, the benefits build up in an exponential kind of way. And sometimes it can be quite sneaky, like you don't realize that they're building up. After I started studying, for instance, I didn't notice a very strong change in myself. But I'd go home from college and my family right away realized you're a lot less angry of a person than you used to be, right? But I didn't realize it because I was doing the work slowly. And which isn't to say I don't get angry. I'm not making any claims like that. But practicing consistently allowed me to make some sort of progress. And I realized that if I look backwards, but on a day-to-day basis, it was hard to see that progress. So that's going to happen if you have a consistent practice, is that sometimes it can be hard to see your practice unless you step out and take the long view. So don't let yourself get exasperated if you begin a long practice, thinking I'm not making any progress, but try to take a step back and see not just how you were compared to yesterday, but how are you compared to a week ago or a month ago or a year ago. And you realize any gradual step towards Buddhahood is in the right direction. So that is progress. So having consistent practice is beneficial because it adds up. Becoming familiar with our mind adds up, So there's 2 general types of meditation. There's what we call placement meditation, and there's what we call analytical meditation. So placement meditation is really the basic level of meditation. I say basic, it's very difficult, but what it does is teaching us to focus our mind so our mind can stay fixed on a single object for however long we want. It's called placement because you're placing your mind on a single object. And so generally, we focus on the breath as beginning mindfulness meditation. They advise, the tradition says, if you can, you should try to visualize an image of the Buddha because that's a virtuous image. So not only are you meditating, but you're accumulating virtue just by focusing on an image of the Buddha. And so many introductory classes start with that image. The reason others start with the breath is because the breath is neutral and it is always with us. So it's harder to get distracted when you're focusing on the breath than it is when you're focusing on a visualized image, which may be outside of our normal experience for many of us. So that's placement meditation. And the goal of it is to focus our mind, to give us more control over our mind, to create a level of suppleness or pliancy to our mental acumen. So whatever we want to focus on, we can put our mind without any complications. Then the other type of meditation, which is equally important, is analytical meditation. So analytical meditation has many different types, but what analytical meditation is doing is, instead of just focusing our mind, is actually navigating some sort of topic. It could be that we are focusing on an object or a conceptual idea, like impermanence, let's say. So you're focusing on impermanence, and you're not meditating just to focus your mind, but to actually understand this topic, however it may be. Or it could be you're focusing on a quality or an emotional experience like compassion, and you're trying to make compassion inseparable from your mind, right? By becoming familiar with compassion, you are indistinguishable from compassion. Or it could be a process of actually doing analysis. So when you're studying a new topic of something you don't understand, you actually are using your meditation, your space of meditation, to analyze that, to analyze the doubts you have, to provide answers or queries to it, you know? And that's why placement meditation is so important as the basis, because that's what holds your attention to whatever it is you're studying. And then on top of that, you add an analytical meditation that takes that focus and puts it somewhere virtuous or beneficial, right? So we use both types of meditation. Other types of analytical meditation, when you get into especially Tantra practice, is visualizing or recognizing yourself as a similitude or a copy of what you hope to be in the future. So you focus on your own Buddha qualities, and you realize yourself as the Buddha you will eventually become. And by doing that, by making yourself more familiar with your own qualities as a potential Buddha, you cause those qualities to ripen more quickly. Or you're just deepening your understanding of the nature of reality in general, or of a specific topic. So there's many different types of analytical meditation. Some people suggest that prayer is a type of meditation and a type of analytical meditation, right? You don't engage in prayer just to zone out and recite nice words. You all don't have the luxury of nice melodies, but when you do it in Tibetan, not all of them, some of them are quite bland, but there are some prayers that have really, really entrancing melodies that you get to hear. That's not the point though. The point of the melodies is to make your mind more attracted to the practice and to make the practice flow more easily. But it's not just to have a little like session where you can bliss out and sing nicely. Like that's not the goal. It's nice, but prayer itself can be a practice of meditation, because what you're doing is, if you're contemplating the words that you're actually saying as part of the prayer, you're making yourself more familiar with those words. Then that is type of meditation. When we recite the Refuge and Bodhicitta prayer, right, the one we recite 3 times at the beginning, by reciting that, we're not just saying those words that go to refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. We're actually trying to generate the mind that does that. And that is a type of analytical meditation. So you can realize that meditation doesn't have to only occur in this gompa sitting on a cushion, right? There are many different ways it can occur in your life. And we have to incorporate all of them. But we start with placement meditation, I think, because in my experience, our lives are so chaotic and we're so used to not really focusing that we need that strength first, you know? And so today we'll do a placement meditation, a very simple mindfulness meditation. And over the course of these 9 weeks, we'll have, I know those of you who have attended my classes, my Sunday classes in the past, I always try to leave time for meditation and I almost never do, because I like to talk and I get distracted, and all of a sudden we have 5 minutes. So let's rush through meditation. We're going to do our best this series, since it is an introductory level, not to do that. So the goal will be to have a good amount of meditation in every class. So today it'll just be a placement meditation, since this is our first class. And any analytical meditation you do, you start with placement, you know. And as you get more accustomed to it, you may only take 1 minute to settle your mind and focus, and then you build on it. Or you may have to do half, depending on your session, as it may be. But as we continue, we'll have different types of meditation we'll bring into the class. Today will be a placement meditation when we get there. But so we have to do both. Or we don't have to do. It's beneficial to us to always practicing both. We build up our skill at placement meditation, and then we use that as the launching pad to engage in analytical meditation. Even if it's just meditation on love and compassion, it's titled analytical meditation. I'm not saying that we go from 0 to meditating on the nature of reality without stop like that. I'm not saying we have to go like that. But even meditating on compassion is analytical meditation. So meditation has a lot of benefits, I think from a Western scientific point of view, they've shown that a regular meditation practice can both increase your neuroplasticity and regrow white matter in your brain. But aside from that, it can cause you to have lower blood pressure, and it can cause all these physiological practices, side effects, which is great. You know what? I'm all for it. But that's not the point. Well, I'll take any benefit I can get, right? Importantly, though, is that a strong meditation practice, in my mind, more importantly, gives you access to the Dharma in ways that you wouldn't have otherwise. As someone who went to grad school, is big on scholarship, it's hard for me to say, like, I can't get this out of a book. But you can't get everything out of a book. I want to just be able to read the teachings and then understand them. But you can't. You can understand the words of them. You can have a taste of them. But if you don't bring them into a meditation practice, they're always going to be disconnected from your mind, right? So what meditating does is it brings the teachings into your life, into your practice in a meaningful way. And it gives you space to actually receive those teachings. Not just teachings, it gives you the space to receive the instruction and the blessings of all of our teachers as well. Is there a plane? What's going on? Okay.
It's the melody.
No, that's okay. So in the short term, we can say that once you have a meditation practice, it can cause you to relax. It can bring some kind of type of stillness and peace to your life. It has these short-term benefits or immediate benefits, and those are great. That shouldn't be our goal, but we can appreciate them when they come, right? That I have a little bit of relaxation. I think a lot of people, though, don't feel that relaxation right away. Yeah, the sound isn't working. It was working. I set it up and it worked, and now it's not. Can everyone hear me? Okay.
Yeah. Without speakers are not working.
Yeah, I know, but can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so then we'll fight with the sound system at a later date, as long as everyone can hear me now.
And people can hear on the.
If everyone,
Here as well. I'm also on the.
okay, so there's always obstacles. That's fine. We work through them. If you can all hear me, we'll deal with the sound system at a later date. Okay. It's okay to appreciate the short-term and the worldly benefits of meditation, such as being relaxed and so forth. That's not the goal. And I know that in my experience, when you begin a meditation practice, if you don't have one, it's not always relaxing. It can be very frustrating when you try to sit down every day. And first you have to schedule a time of your day. You have to change your routine. And then you do. And all you see is I'm distracted all the time. How is this relaxing to me? It feels like all I'm doing is my whole mind is a whirlpool, It can feel that way. It doesn't always feel relaxed. That doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. In fact, that often means you're doing it right. But if you're expecting to meditate and then be relaxed at the end, sometimes it takes a while to get there. When you achieve great, high levels of mind, which I'll talk about shortly, then I've seen teachers who are very old and decrepit looking sit and meditate for hours on end and then get up and be perfectly spry, have no problems at all. Because the power of their mind creates a suppleness of body and mind and a bliss that is accompanied by that makes it easy for them. I'm not there. If I meditate for an hour, I get up and there's stiffness, because I haven't reached that level yet. And that's fine, but don't expect you meditate, especially if you're not used to meditating. It's a little easier, again, in India, because you're used to sitting on the ground. You get Westerners and you have them sit on the ground like this for more than 10 minutes. Very hard. you know, just because they're not used to it. Their bodies aren't used to it. Their culture isn't used to it. It's changing now. Remember the first time I came to India, it was 2005. I was in Madras for 6 months with a study program, and we studied all sorts of things, mostly arts. I mean, I did Sanskrit, but then Bharatanatyam, Kalipayattu, batik painting, Carnatic vocal music, mridangam, different folk arts like this. But we also had a yoga asana class, and then a yoga sutra class, and a Advaita class. And one of the students on this group was like a jock. I think he played field hockey, lacrosse or something. He was like the most fit of all of us. And whenever he tried to sit, he couldn't get his legs to be less than this. Just because the muscles in his legs, like he was really strong and fit, but he just couldn't get his legs to move like this. And he'd try, and we'd have to sit for hours to do all these different courses, and he just couldn't do it because the bodies aren't used to it. So if you start meditating more regularly, you might find that there are going to be aches and pains in your body if you're sitting in ways or places you're not used to. And you have to find the balance. We have to recognize that we live in these bodies, we have to take care of them. If that means sitting in a chair or it means adopting a different position, that's okay, you know? So we don't want to hurt ourselves in order to meditate. If it's just like slight discomfort because you're not used to it, then that's good to try to get through, right? But if it's an actual pain in your body, there's no utility in putting yourself through pain, right? So now there are some dangers to meditation. The danger is a strong word. Like I said, meditating means becoming familiar with something, right? You can meditate on anything. You can meditate on anger. You can meditate on hatred if you become familiar with it, if you focus your mind on it. And that's not helpful. That's not going to benefit you, right? So the dangers of meditation, one of them is that you're meditating on non-virtuous objects or harmful objects, which is why just meditating blindly isn't useful. You need to combine it with wisdom and with study. You know, otherwise, when someone upsets you, says something really mean to you, how long do you focus on that insult they gave you? That's the type of meditation. All your attention is focused on this thing they said. And then it gets blown up in your mind and becomes much bigger than it was, right? When they actually said it. Because you've made that thing, you become familiar with that insult and focused on that negativity. And so by doing so, you've kind of blocked out the possibility of a positive or neutral reaction, and you've only created the possibility for a non-virtuous reaction, right? That's type of meditation. So obviously we don't want to do that, but we should be aware that that is the similar practice to what we're doing. Some of the other dangers of meditation, again, danger is a strong word. Some of the other possible difficulties that can arise in meditation is, like I said, progress can be slow, and so it can be easy to become exasperated. And especially my experience with mindfulness meditation, at first it's really difficult and you find yourself distracted quite a lot. And then you get some control over your mind, and you think, I'm making progress. I can sit for longer periods of time without being distracted, without having all these obstacles come up. And then all of a sudden, all these new obstacles are arising in your mind, and you feel yourself like you're more distracted than ever. What we usually say is, what's happened is those distractions were always there, but your awareness wasn't even attentive to them because they're more subtle. So until you actually can build up enough awareness to get rid of the coarse distractions, you won't even recognize these subtle distractions. So it can feel like a roller coaster, because whenever you make enough progress, all of a sudden there are new obstacles that come to light. And those obstacles aren't actually new. You just weren't aware of them before. You know what I mean? So another danger is that it's easy to become overwhelmed or feel like you're not making progress. So if you are critical with yourself and look at the big picture, then you often can see that isn't the case. But if you just rely on your gut instinct, that today I sat down for a half hour and I couldn't get any good meditation in that whole half hour, then that can become a source of difficulty in your life. And that can sour you on meditation and on the Dharma in general. So what's the point, you know? So always be on the lookout for that, especially when you're starting out and it's new. So with that in mind, I wanted to talk a little bit about placement meditation in general and what we call shamatha or shine in Tibetan, palm binding meditation. As we said, placeful meditation is the basis for all other meditative practices. And so calm abiding, or shamatha, I'm going to go back and forth with terms. Sometimes there are even more weird esoteric terms that people have decided to translate it into English. In Tibetan, it's very clear. Shi means peace or peacefulness. Ne means to abide somewhere. So it's either peaceful abiding or abiding peacefully. It's very clear. Sanskrit, shamatha, a little bit different etymology, but it gets to the same point. So this is our base of mindfulness, trying to develop shamatha. This is a mindfulness practice. And we say generally, when we're trying to develop this mind, there are 5 major obstacles to achieving calm abiding, and there are 8 antidotes. So there's 5 obstacles. And those are useful for us to know as we begin, because then we can do our best to avoid them. The first obstacle is laziness. So the fact that we're even engaging in any meditation practice already means that we're working with that obstacle. But I know in my life, laziness is my biggest obstacle to my practice, 100% of the time. And laziness doesn't just mean lethargy. It also means distracting yourself with non-dharmic activities. That's a type of laziness. Or it also means a mind that says, I'm not good enough to do this, so I'm not even going to try. So putting yourself down in that way is a type of laziness. Those are all types of laziness. One, just like lethargy, wanting to do nothing. But also the second one being a mind that says, I'm not good enough, so I shouldn't even bother. Or a mind that is attracted to doing a lot of things, but not Dharma things. All types of laziness. That's the first obstacle. And so we're taught that there are 4 antidotes to that obstacle. The other obstacles all have 1 antidote. But the first one, laziness, since it is so kind of overwhelming, has 4 antidotes. And they work together. So the first antidote is faith. And again, not a blind faith, but faith that, or belief that meditation practice is beneficial, right? And that belief, you can create it or develop it by seeing people, either people in your life that you know, or historical examples that come from the teachings of people who are great meditators, and see how meditation improved their life. That's what we mean by faith. We don't mean just taking it because someone says meditation is good for you. No, it's either through your small practice of meditation, you see some small benefits, or you observe it in others. That's what we mean by faith. So you develop a knowing kind of wisdom-based faith. That's the first obstacle. And then from that faith, you develop the second, antidote. From that faith, you develop the second antidote, which is aspiration. So once you have faith or confidence that meditation is beneficial, you develop the aspiration to actually engage in that practice yourself. So you start, the first antidote is faith, building off of that, or confidence, we can say. Building off of that is aspiration. And then building off of the aspiration, the third antidote is effort. So now that you're confident that meditation is useful and you want to engage in it, then you exert effort into it, And then the last one from that effort is what we call pliancy. Pliancy or suppleness. This is a very strange term. But what it means is there's more than one type. I'll explain those in a second. This is first mental pliancy. We develop mental pliancy. Mental pliancy, what that is, it is a type of mind that allows yourself the ability to not be fixed in a certain place. So exactly what we think of by the time the term pliant, that something can bend, it can move, it can adjust. Mental pliancy is that, right? It is an adjustability and an ability to adapt to different situations, right? So once you have confidence that meditation is beneficial, you have the aspiration to engage in meditation practice, and you exert effort into it. From that effort, you develop a mind that is able to adapt into different situations and engage in meditation practice. So that's what we mean by pliancy. Now, that term is going to come up again. We start with mental pliancy, and for right now, that's all that matters. But then you'll hear the term mental pliancy. From mental pliancy, you get physical pliancy. So physical pliancy is a physical looseness in your body, right? So the more you meditate after developing mental pliancy, they say you develop physical pliancy as well, that your body becomes much more relaxed and much more amenable to meditation. And that's why you can see people who otherwise may be decrepit, let's say, but they can meditate for quite a long time without pain because their body has developed some sort of pliancy. So you have mental pliancy, and then physical pliancy. Then comes the bliss of physical pliancy. So the bliss of physical pliancy is not just that your body becomes relaxed, but there's a pleasurable sensation that accompanies it. That your body itself becomes relaxed and enjoys the adaptability that comes with it. And then lastly is the bliss of mental pliancy. And that comes at the very end when you actually achieve calm abiding. And so not only is your mind adaptable and can navigate any situation, but by doing so, you experience great mental bliss. And they actually say that the bliss of mental pliancy is more pleasurable than what most of us experience in our everyday life. They say it's even more pleasurable than orgasm, the bliss of mental pliancy, just by meditating. Which is always weird for a monk to say to a group of lay people, but that's what the teachings say. So I apologize. And they actually say when you achieve the bliss of mental pliancy, sometimes for some people, when they achieve it for the first time, it's so different than what they're used to, it actually breaks their concentration. That you achieve it when you achieve calm abiding, but for a moment, it distracts you because you're not used to having that level of bliss. The way Pabonka Rinpoche describes it as an analogy is, I don't know if any of you have shaved your head, but when you have a freshly shaven head, and then someone with a warm hand puts it on top of a freshly shaven head, that sensation, that is like a simulacrum of this bliss that you get. And if any of you have shaved your head, it does feel really nice when you have like a fresh shaven head. Just to kind of do this. But so the first one of those is mental pliancy itself, and that is the fourth and the real antidote to laziness, right? So we say there are 4 antidotes to the one obstacle of laziness. The real antidote is that pliancy. And the other 3, faith, aspiration, and effort, are what build up to that mental pliancy. So that's the first obstacle. And we can say the fact that we've come here together and that we're here engaging in this study means, to some extent, we've already moved past that first obstacle, at least for this morning. You know, when you go to meditate tomorrow evening, we'll see. Or when I won't say you, when I go to meditate tomorrow evening, you know, that obstacle can come back. But for now, we've made some effort against it, right? That's the first obstacle. The second obstacle is forgetting the instruction, is what it's called. What this really means is forgetting so now you've already started meditating, right? You've overcome the obstacle of laziness, so you've engaged in the practice. You're starting the practice of meditation. To forget the instruction actually means to forget the meditative object, whatever it is you're focused on. So if we're focused on the breath, then it's that. If you're focused on a visualized image, whatever it is. Letting your mind forget or be distracted away from whatever your object of meditation is. That is what's called forgetting the instruction. And the antidote to it, you know, is not mind-blowing, it is mindfulness. It's just paying attention. The interesting thing is, the word for mindfulness, drenpa, smriti, is also the same word for memory, right? So they often say the antidote to forgetting the object is remembering the object. You say, okay, thanks. I don't know how that helps me, but what it means by that is, by remembering the object, by being mindful, is showing that your distraction is merely a focus of you not applying effort to staying focused, right? And as you work on your mind more and more, that mindfulness increases. And so that becomes less of an obstacle. But the reason that's set up separate is because the third obstacle is set up in distinction from distraction or from forgetting the object. And the third obstacle has 2 parts. It's agitation and dullness, sometimes called excitement and lethargy. Different words meaning the same thing. And so agitation or excitement is exactly what it sounds like, is that even if you have some sort of focus on the object, you're so tight clinging to it that you aren't able to stay focused. So it's not simply that you forget the object, right? But rather that your mind is racing in so many circles that you can't stay focused. It's not quite the same as forgetting. It's more active. And then dullness or lethargy is the opposite of that. So it's like falling into a sleep, right? So that's more similar to forgetting, but even then it's a little bit different. It's showing that you've relaxed too far, you know, you have too many good vibes going, okay? And so the antidote to agitation and dullness is what we call, there's many translations for this term, sheishin. Sometimes it's called vigilance, sometimes it's called introspection, sometimes it's awareness. So awareness and mindfulness are different insofar as mindfulness is what's keeping you focused on your object. Awareness is that part of your mind that is recognizing when you become distracted. You see the distinction? So we often say, if your mind is a wild elephant, the pole in the center of the training ground is the mindfulness that your elephant is tied to. That's keeping you in place. And the hook that you jab it with, sorry, I don't train elephants, but this is the analogy they use. That hook you jab the elephant with when it's going out of line, that's the awareness, right? So awareness is actively seeking out, when am I distracted? So in the beginning of our practice, we should have a mind of awareness that's always kind of running around in the background, kind of like a bouncer at a club. It's always paying attention. Notice when you're distracted. That's your awareness. Your mindfulness is what keeps you on your object. So they work together. Mindfulness and awareness, or mindfulness and vigilance, work hand in hand, but they're fulfilling different functions and they're different secondary minds or mental factors, as we say. We'll talk more about minds and mental factors as we continue in the series. But mental factors are types of kind of secondary minds, right? Mindfulness and awareness work together to increase your meditation, but they're fulfilling different functions. So the antidote to excitement or agitation and dullness or lethargy is awareness. The awareness is what's recognizing those things and then doing something about it.
Venerable, could I ask this? Because I know I do tend to, from time to time, slip into it during my meditation. I'd be aware that I'm agitated, but I'm not able to let go of that agitation. So many times I just stay with the agitation.
Well, so what you brought up is the next obstacle. So the next obstacle is what we call the non-application. So non-application means your awareness has recognized that you're agitated or lethargic, but then you don't do anything about it, right? So that's the fourth obstacle, is what's called the non-application of the antidote. So the question is, what do you do to remedy this agitation? And what do you do to remedy lethargy? And the interesting thing is all of the texts kind of use the same language we do, is that when you find your mind, the idea of tight and loose is what they use, right? Which makes sense on like a conceptual level. It's still sometimes hard to apply. But when you notice that you are agitated, and by agitated, we don't mean upset, right? But we mean that your mind is bouncing around, right? What you need to do is relax your focus. It means that your focus is too strong or too tight, right? That you're exerting effort in a way that is not useful. So you have to try to relax your focus and allow things to take a little bit of a more hazy outlook, so to speak. So you relax your focus. And then the flip side of that is when you find yourself too lethargic, you have to then tighten your focus and exert effort into a more kind of condensed area that's more intense in that way. There are also like very practical things you can do. If you find yourself lethargic, that isn't the same as being sleepy, but they go hand in hand. So sometimes opening a window, getting a breeze, being in a warm room makes lethargy and sleepiness really easy, which is hard in South India to avoid. But so trying to have some sort of breeze can also help. But that breeze can also create a distraction. So you have to find that balance, right? Well, so the antidote they give is tightening and loosening, which is, it makes sense like on an instinctual level, but describing how to do that is difficult, right? So when you find your mind too excited, you find that, and I won't go into too much detail here, but Bonka Rinpoche says a little bit more in Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand when he talks about this, that both excitement and agitation, there's coarse excitement and agitation, coarse excitement and lethargy, and dull and subtle excitement and lethargy. And both, when you have either the coarse or the subtle, especially with excitement, you have your meditative object in mind, right? You're able to stay on your object, but it's almost vibrating. You're so strong on it. So it's not the same as forgetting your object, but it is imbuing more characteristics on your object than is really there. One of the ways with your breath, it's hard to notice sometimes. It's hard to apply antidotes because the breath is so natural. So one of the things you can notice when you're breathing, if your breathing is no longer natural and you're forcing it in one way or another, that's often an indication of lethargy or excitement. And so trying to relax into a natural rhythm brings you out from either one of those. When you're focusing on something, so what's most common for a beginning is focusing on an image of Shakyamuni Buddha, right? And when you start that meditation, again, when you're focusing on an image, it should be a visualized Buddha in front of you. So it shouldn't be a picture of a Buddha or a statue. It should be a visualized Buddha in front of you, or whatever it is you're focusing on. At first, that may be very hazy, right? It may not be clear. You just may have like the general outline of the Buddha and the right colors and things like that. And then as your meditation gets stronger, more details are filled in, right? And so what you notice if your mind is too tight is that instead of focusing on the image of the Buddha, you're only focusing on one aspect of it. So you can't see the whole picture. And so when you have that, then you kind of zoom out, almost in a cinematic way to try to get a bigger picture again. So it depends on what object you're focusing on, or whatever the object of your meditation is, how you apply the antidote to excitement or to lethargy. But in general, they use the ideas of tightening or loosening. Yeah.
Venerable, if I may add, generally I've seen like we ordinary beings, right? We'll put on a timer of 10, we'll sit down and we'll just start to meditate. So what I've seen the mind is still too chaotic. So at least I think we invest some time in just natural breathing, maybe deep breathing or something, like as long as unless we really feel that our mind is calm now to start the meditation. So that has been a little bit helpful. So I only start the meditation when I think now my mind is calm to get on to that meditation.
There are different techniques. It's a good one. Instead of starting with a timer right away, give your time to settle into the space and then go from there, which is why at the beginning of a class, even before the class starts, it's nice to take your cushion and to just settle into the space and not be engaging in kind of conversation and not bring your worldly experience or activities into the Gompa with you. It's nice to come in and just take a few minutes before class to sit and put your mind in the right place to be part of a class, right? When that's possible, as opposed to coming and talking and chatting and going right from like having a conversation to the class is like very abrupt. So trying to find a buffer zone is nice. Well, what I like to do sometimes for meditation, and we won't do that right now, but over the course, we'll teach this, is what's called 9-round breathing. And this is actually a meditation that comes from the Tantric tradition, but His Holiness teaches it to audiences that are non-Buddhist. And what it is instead of letting your breath be natural, you do very specific type of breathing that is accompanied by different visualizations. And what I find that's useful for is at the beginning of a meditation session, when you have all these distractions, being very focused like that on your breathing and being forceful helps block out those distractions. And so you do that once right at the beginning. You do one set of 9-round breathing, which is a very specific type of breathing practice. And then from there, you settle into a regular calm abiding practice or whatever it may be. And that is just like, it shakes the cobwebs off and gets you into the right place. So it's a similar thing, creating a buffer zone between the everyday life and the meditation. But ideally, right? And this is something I talk about all the time, in that in our practice, in our lives, we don't get the luxury of buffer zones, right? So all of our experiences in our life should be brought into our spiritual path. Not necessarily a path of meditation, but a path of spiritual contemplation and action. So whether it's us being stuck in traffic or us at work or whatever it is we are, us, going to the movies, listening to music, that should be part of our spiritual practice. And eventually you can engage in a type of meditation with everything around you all the time. Because a meditation is being mindful of what's going on around you and reacting to it in a way that comes from dharmic insight, not from your afflicted minds. So even ideally, you won't need that buffer zone eventually, right? Because your mind will be able to do whatever it wants. But for now, we take whatever techniques and tools we need to get us going. And then the fifth obstacle is kind of the opposite of the fourth. So the fourth obstacle, like I said, is non-application of the antidotes. The fifth obstacle is over-application of the antidotes. So when you notice that your mind is too agitated, so you try to pull back to introduce some relaxation into it. If you go too far, you fall into lethargy, right? And so that's an over-application of the antidote. And so the obstacle to that is to stop applying your antidote. But that just is a reminder that the things that are our antidotes that help us, if you go too far into them, they can hurt you. It's the same with medicine, right? Like what can help you can also cause you to OD, depending on the dosage. It's the same idea that you need to know how to apply it, and you only learn that through practice. And luckily, when you're doing mindfulness practice, you don't have like the same fear as like medicines. You're not going to OD, but you have to see in your practice, okay, I thought I was applying an appropriate amount of relaxation and looseness, but then I just got sleepy and got distracted. So obviously that was too much. So in the future, I'll try to be a little less heavy-handed or whatever it is, And it's a process of iteration, but slowly we get better at it. So I won't go through them all, but so those are the 5 obstacles and the 8 antidotes that are obstacles to our achieving what's called shamatha, or combining. In our practice to eventually achieve calm abiding, it can seem quite difficult. Pabonka says, any ordinary being, says, any ordinary being who's never meditated before, if they go do a 1-year retreat, they can achieve calm abiding. Many people can do it in 6 months or 1 year. And again, most of us don't have the capacity to go do a 1-year retreat somewhere, but it just shows this is a very achievable goal in our life, right? It's not something that is only going to happen in far, far future lives through, millennia of practice. No, we can achieve calm abiding in this life or get close to it, even if we don't have the luxury of going on long retreat, but it's that close to us, which I think an important thing to remember, because that helps strengthen our practice when we have confidence. This isn't just some imaginary thing. And so when you're trying to develop calm abiding, they say there are 9 mental abodes or 9 steps to achieve calm abiding. And I won't go through them all here because you can read about them at another time, or we can talk about them later if you want. But basically, what they are there 9 steps to notice. Like the first one, which is just called placement, which is when you're able to put your awareness on the object of your meditation. You can't keep it there for very long. It's not steady, it's not strong, but you can actually say, okay, I want to focus on object X, and you can actually do it. So most of us very quickly achieve that first mental abode of having placement, because it doesn't matter how long you can stay there, just that you can do it, right? And the next one is called balance. The next one is called, continuous placement. So when you can focus without any distraction for like a minute, So these are just 9 steps that are measuring how close you are to achieving calm abiding. And so calm abiding would be the result. That's number 10. So there's 9 mental abodes, and number 10 would be actual calm abiding. And so the distinction of them, it's just a matter of how long you can keep your focus, and then eventually what effort you need to exert to keep that focus. Because eventually calm abiding requires no effort. That is the thing about it. When you actually achieve calm abiding, or even the step before calm abiding, it is single-pointed concentration on any object of your desire without any effort at all. So you can say, I want to focus on XYZ, and right away, your mind can go right there. So you don't need that buffer zone anymore, because your mind is so focused that whenever you want to meditate on, you can do it like that. And real calm abiding, when you actually achieve it, what distinguishes the 9th mental abode and calm abiding is, like I said, that bliss of mental pliancy. So not only are you meditating single pointedly on any object, but by doing so, it brings an experience of pleasure to your mind and to your body. And this is important, not for when we're focusing on our breath, right? Just being able to develop mindfulness isn't the point. But when you want to understand the nature of reality, you want to understand emptiness or any of these other important topics, being able to focus on them like that, that is how you develop minds of meditation. But that is how you develop deep experiential insight into the nature of reality, is by having a mind that can focus on it. So right now we don't have that mind, so we do the best we can, right? This isn't to say you have to wait to become, it's very easy to think, well, I haven't achieved calm abiding yet, so I'm not going to focus on meditating on impermanence or perfect human birth, anything like that. I'll wait until I get there. No, we do both at once, recognizing that we're not perfect at any of them, but we're doing the best we can. And as we get better at one, that improves our skill in the other. And as we get better at that one, it improves the first one. So they're mutually beneficial in that way. So I won't go through the 9 steps, but just know that there is like a roadmap, that the utility of it is just recognizing that it is a slow process. So what's most important for me is that first step is one we've already achieved, just being able to focus on our object. Like that's how we start simple. So 15. meditation, like I said. Okay, I'll do this next part really quickly, and then I was gonna meditate now, but I'm gonna do the next part quite quickly. Just a brief introduction to Buddhism in general. I know
One question from the previous one.
Yeah, go ahead.
So you mentioned one of the antidotes is pliancy, but how do
Yeah.
we build it?
Right, pliancy, so that's mental pliancy. It's of the four, you start with mental pliancy, right? You build it through effort. Like I said, so that is the fourth of those four antidotes that combat laziness. So it starts with faith. Faith leads to aspiration. Aspiration leads to effort. So through exerting effort, actually doing the work that's difficult, that is putting yourself on a cushion, actually trying to do this, then your mind develops pliance. So it comes through effort. You can't just be like, okay, I want my mind to be more pliant. I want my mind to be more adaptable. You put in the effort to engage in meditation practice. And as a result of that, you get this mental pliancy. You can, I suppose, if you recognize that you haven't achieved any level of mental pliancy, you can try to be more aware of it, to see when your mind is rigid and tight and not able to adapt to different situations. And so if you can bring yourself to be aware of that, when you notice it, then you can try to counteract it right away. You know what I mean? Just like in the real world as well, not just in your meditation practice. So in that way, you can try to nudge yourself towards achieving it. But in general, it comes through effort. So those first four antidotes really work in sequence, having confidence that meditation is beneficial, aspiring to not only meditate, but to achieve the benefits of meditation, and then exerting effort to getting yourself to a space where you can meditate. So that's not just exerting effort into your meditation, but even getting yourself onto a meditation cushion. So that can mean for us, like setting off 15 minutes every day in the morning or in the evening and creating a schedule that says, I'm going to set this time off. That is exerting effort to combat laziness, right? By just rescheduling your morning routine to say, I'm going to take these 15 minutes. That's one of the ways of exerting effort. So it's not just sitting on a cushion, but creating the space where you have time to sit on a cushion. And then through that, you develop this mental pliancy, this sometimes called suppleness of mind. Does that help a little bit? It's hard to just be like, I want my mind to be more supple. It's also weird to think of a mind as being supple.
No, it makes sense. I think once you push yourself, things anyways become kind of easier and easier. Like the first time you hear something, it's difficult. But when you put effort, you do it again and again. It anyways kind of becomes a little easier for your mind.
And we know that's true with everything, right? Anything we have in our lives, everything gets easier through practice. Whether that be a virtuous thing or a non-virtuous thing, they get easier through practice. We build up habits and familiarity with something. So, since most of you are already familiar with Buddhism in general, this part will be very brief. But now that we've talked about meditation, and we've gone into some detail about calm body meditation, which serves as the basis for further analytical meditation, just a brief overview of Buddhism, since this is Buddhist philosophy and meditation. Right? So I think we all know the life story of the Buddha, but in brief, he was born as a prince, or he showed the aspect of being a prince. And his father had consulted a seer before he was born, and the sage said, your son will be a great leader of men, but it wasn't clear if he's going to be a worldly leader or a spiritual leader. And so King Shrona wanted his son to be a great worldly leader, the same as he was. So he thought the way to do that was to protect his son and keep him within the confines of the palace, the royal palace, and not expose him to the outside world. And as a result, he had everything you could imagine. He had every luxury, every nicety. He had a harem of women. He excelled at sport and hunting and all the different things that was expected of a royal prince. But he was still dissatisfied. And he eventually was able to convince his father to let him go on a chariot ride of the city. And his father agreed. They cleaned up the city because he didn't want him to see anything that he thought could disrupt his mind. But they didn't do a perfect job of it. So on these chariot rides, he saw a sick person, an old person, and then a corpse, a dying person. And as he saw these types of suffering, he had the realization that I am going to get old, I am going to get sick, I am going to die. And as long as that's true, I'm suffering. It doesn't matter how many luxuries I have around me, I am suffering. So he had this insight into the nature of suffering. And so that's when he committed to be free from suffering. And so he gave up his royal life. He gave up his wife and his son, Rahula, and he joined a group of Indian ascetics, and he practiced very severe asceticism for a number of years. At one point, for 6 years, eating only a grain of rice a day, they say. So if you see, I don't know if we have any images of him here, but there's one image of the Buddha that's very common of the skeletal Buddha, right? And he looks like a skeleton, and you can see all of his veins popping out and all of his bones. And that was when he was practicing this extreme asceticism. But as he practiced this, he had some spiritual insights, right? But he realized he wasn't any closer to being free from suffering. So he realized that the two extremes, the extreme of pure luxury and the extreme of pure asceticism, neither brought you freedom from suffering. They may move you away from suffering a little bit in this direction or that direction, but they never brought you freedom from suffering. And so that's how he finally bathed in the river and he cut his hair. He received an offering of, they say, coconut milk or coconut rice porridge. And he ate for the first time. And all of the ascetics he's practicing with said, "Oh, you're a hypocrite, you're useless," and they abandoned him, right? And he said, "No, I'm going to figure this out." And he sat under the Bodhi tree and committed himself to realizing the nature of reality. And he was able to realize it over a course of meditation. And so the Dharma he taught isn't something he invented, but something he realized. And it had to do with the balance of balancing yourself between the luxury and asceticism, realizing neither of those brought you actual freedom from suffering, but is finding the middle way, the path that acknowledges both of those and finds a way through them, that understands the nature of reality, understands the role both suffering and pleasure play in experiencing reality, and then finding out how to undermine that suffering and be free from it. And so that is what he taught. And when he first had that moment of realization, he thought he could never teach this, that this is too much for me to teach. People won't understand it. It's too heavy and it'll be too hard. So instead of teaching it, he kept it to himself. And then they say Brahma and the other gods called out to him and said, "You can't keep this to yourself. You're an awakened one. You've had realizations that no other humans have. So you need to share them." And so due to that is when he gave his first sermon. And the first sermon he gave was to the 5 other ascetics that he'd been practicing with. They saw him on the road after having abandoned him because they thought that he had given up the life. And just seeing him, they realized, "You've had a realization. You've got something we don't have." And they were his first 5 disciples. And that's when he gave what's called the first teaching, which is the teaching of the Four Noble Truths. And it's often considered the first turning of the wheel of Dharma. So the Four Noble Truths we'll go more into in later sessions, but they are that suffering exists, suffering has a cause, there is a path to be free from suffering, there is a cessation of suffering, and there is a path that leads to that cessation of suffering. So those Four Noble Truths are the foundational elements of every Buddhist lineage and all Buddhist thought. So any Buddhist you meet, regardless of the tradition or the culture or the anything, is going to agree on those Four Noble Truths as the basis of all of the Buddhist teachings. I won't go into more of them here because we'll talk about them at length in a later session. But so that is the quick idea of how the Buddhist teachings came about. And what's important for me is to think about how, well, first off, we can say the Buddha taught what's called the 3 turnings of the wheel. And 3 different ways the Buddha taught the Dharma. And he taught the Dharma differently to different students. So the first turning of the wheel are most of the teachings that are collected in what we today call the Pali Canon or the Hinayana teachings, quote unquote. And then the second turning of the wheel is when he taught all of the Prajnaparamita material, all the wisdom material. And then the third turning of the wheel is him teaching what is now categorized as material that's the sutras and the teachings that go with the nature of the mind and are often adopted by the Chittamachman school, so not the final view of the Buddha. But those are called the 3 turnings of the wheel. And he didn't teach them sequentially. He taught them all at the same time, depending on the audience that was in front of him. And the reason that's useful to know is it just shows the Buddha was teaching the audience who was in front of him. He didn't say he said there is one truth about the nature of reality, but he recognized that not every student needed to be taught the same way. So he taught to meet the needs of the students. And they say that a Buddha, one of the amazing qualities of a Buddha is that due to his realization, when he speaks, the students hear him in their own language. You know, whether that is true or not, that's one of the legendary aspects of a Buddha, is that no matter what the Buddha spoke, all of the disciples could hear him in their own language, which is why he had disciples that came from all parts of India and Nepal at that time, right? And that he taught what the students would need to hear. So if you held on to the belief that all phenomena were permanent, when you heard him teach, you heard him teaching that, you know, all phenomena are impermanent. And if you had the belief that all phenomena exist in this other way, then like his teaching counteracted that to you. So the way the teachings were received by the students were due to the Buddha's omniscient mind and his recognition that not everyone needs the same thing. So the reason that's important for me is we're all in different places on our journey, right? In life and in our spiritual progress. So the teachings of the Buddha adapt to meet our needs, which isn't to say that the teachings ever change, but it is to say that what may not work for us right now may work for us later. So if you reach a teaching that is really, it runs up against your mind and it doesn't seem to make sense, it doesn't mean the teaching's wrong. It means that you're not at a place in your journey where that teaching is useful for you. So instead, you find other teachings that are useful for you. And then eventually you can go and reassess and see if they fit together in a different way. So the Buddha was skillful in that way. And that's expressed in the way he taught what's called the 3 turnings of the wheel. When you get into more advanced teaching, we talk about these 4 different philosophical systems the Buddha taught. So if you look at the Buddhist texts, the ancient Indian texts, we divide them into 4 different philosophical views about how they understand the nature of reality. And the most refined view is what we call the Buddhist final view, what is under the term Prasangika Madhyamaka. That's how we understand the nature of reality. But he didn't teach that to all of his students, because for some, if he taught that, it would have caused them to fall into these nihilistic ideas because they weren't prepared to understand it. So he taught different views because he realized, I want you to move towards Buddhahood, right? That is the goal. Every day we make small steps towards Buddhahood, towards being free from suffering. And so different people need different techniques to get there. And ultimately, what is at the heart of Buddhist practice is being free from suffering. It's to find actual happiness for yourself and for all sentient beings. That's the whole goal, right? That was what motivated the Buddha to engage in his search. It's his realization that I am suffering. I have dissatisfaction. As long as I'm going to get old and I'm going to die, I am not free from this cycle of suffering. So how can I be free from it? So when we begin our practice, we need to think, what do we mean by suffering? And what do we mean by happiness? If our goal is to be free from suffering, and our goal is to live and have a mind that's filled with happiness for ourselves and others, what do we mean by happiness? As long as our happiness is defined as something outside of us, it's not going to be real happiness. As long as our happiness is a worldly experience, it's not real happiness. And again, I'm just giving you an overview today, but when we talk about suffering later, one of the most pernicious types of suffering is what we call the suffering of change, which is the realization that almost all of our worldly happiness is actually a type of suffering, which sounds really depressing, and it shouldn't be. But what it's recognizing is that what we run to and grasp on as if it's happiness gives us a temporary flavor of happiness, but it's not real happiness. There's happiness that is much greater than that. There's freedom from suffering that runs much deeper than that. And so it's important to reflect on, when we think about suffering, what do I mean by suffering? How do I experience suffering in my life? What is my taste of happiness? And what do I mean by happiness? We say the fundamental ignorance that pervades all sentient beings that we're trying to be free from. And the fundamental thing that makes us all the same is we all want to be free from suffering, and we all want to have happiness. That is an equalizer. But the problem is we don't understand what suffering is, and we don't understand what happiness is. So we run towards suffering and grab on it with both hands and think that we're grabbing happiness. And that's like the fundamental difficulty of our human life, or of sentient beings' lives. So the Buddha's, at the core of his teaching, was showing you what is suffering, which is why that's the first noble truth. And by understanding what suffering is, you understand what is happiness and how to achieve it in this life and in future lives. we also can just briefly think about how the teachings of the Buddha and what we now call the religion of Buddhism is different than other religions and different than other philosophical and cultural systems. And there are a number of different ways that it distinguishes itself, but the two that I think are most beneficial for my mind is one, that it has a strong basis in logic and not in blind faith only. That the Buddha very clearly said, don't accept my teachings just because you have respect for me, but test them, analyze them, see how they work for you. And then through your application, then you develop confidence in them. So use logic, use your experience. We do have an emphasis on faith, but that faith is due to our observations of our teachers around us and other practitioners. It isn't blind faith. It isn't taking something at face value just because it's said by the Buddha. So faith is important, but not the kind of blind faith that other religious traditions accept you to have. That you can't understand this, it's too big for you, therefore just believe it blindly. Buddhism says, no, investigate it. But find that difference between being skeptical and being cynical. So when I was young, I was cynical. Cynical has an edge of anger to it and an edge of superiority and ego. Skeptical says, I'm going to investigate this to find the truth of it, but it's open-minded, right? So we're encouraged to be skeptical, but not cynical. Cynical has ego. Skeptical doesn't. Skeptical is open-minded. So that's the first distinguishing factor, is that Buddhism encourages us to investigate it, and through our experience and through logic, develop confidence in the teachings. And then the other thing that for me makes Buddhism stand out is that Buddhism shows us that my suffering and my happiness come from me. They don't come from other people or from the world around me. Then the circumstances might make it easier for me to experience suffering or difficulty, right? I can't avoid the circumstances I find myself in. But my happiness and suffering come from my reaction to those circumstances. I'm not dependent on any external force to give me happiness, to give me salvation, to free me from suffering. I do that work. So there's a level of independence that Buddhist philosophy and religion teaches. And we do rely on our spiritual friends, we rely on our teachers to help guide us in the path. But ultimately, we do the work. And so for me, that is freeing, because I don't have to depend on someone else. I don't have to depend on some magical being who is, due to their proclivities, going to grant me happiness. Which is one of the reasons I think, at least in the West, Buddha's interest in Buddhism has been growing over the last 2 decades, because people like that freedom, that independence that says, I have the capacity to find happiness, to be free from suffering. And yes, I rely on others to teach me the way, to help me, to guide me, to inspire me, but ultimately I do that work. So that is a distinguishing factor. Yeah.
So I agree with you, but that's probably applicable to like someone like, like people in this room with, some food and shelter. What if I was a beggar on the streets of...
So what we say is...
I would be mired in myself.
So what we say is, you're correct. Insofar as, let me give the example. The example that's often given is, we can't avoid the circumstances and environment that we're in. This is a result of our past karma. But the analogy given is if someone has been shot by an arrow. Now you've been shot by this arrow, so you have the pain of being shot by an arrow. So now what do? Do you remove the arrow and dress the wound? Or do you say, who shot this arrow? Where did it come from? What's it made of? Do you create more suffering on top of that experience, right? So the experience of suffering and being shot by an arrow, you couldn't avoid it. It happened. But you choose what you do next. And which is, do you compound your suffering or do you take steps to remediate it? Now, for us, we have that luxury. You're right. People that are experiencing much more difficult situations than us, it's very hard to go to someone who is unhoused or who is hungry and say, you're suffering, you can be free from suffering on your own. It's just in your mind. Like, that's a really hard thing to do. And so you have to be skillful when you are applying these teachings, right? It's not skillful for me to go to someone who doesn't have enough food to eat or doesn't have a house and say, your suffering comes from your mind. You should be happy. Like, that is a very foolish thing to do, right? So we have to recognize that we have certain privileges that allow us to realize this. And other people don't have those. due to their circumstances. So then what do? We do our best to realize that. And the Dalai Lama has criticized Buddhists, Tibetans for this especially. Tibetans often say, like, I try to develop mind of bodhicitta. I want all beings to be free from suffering. And therefore, I'm working for them to become a Buddha. So I don't have to worry about worldly benefit. I want them to have otherworldly benefit. And so you don't see as many Tibetan Buddhist homeless shelters or like food pantries, things like this. And the Dalai Lama at a teaching in Gyume, he called this out and he said it's shameful. He's like, look at our Christian brothers and sisters who do all this work to help people that are impoverished. We say we want to help all sentient beings. We can't even give them a meal. That's shameful. Yes, that's worldly benefit. It's temporary. It's not long lasting, but they need that. So if we have the means to do it, we should do it, right? So you have to balance these things. And so sometimes what someone needs is a meal. They don't need you to tell them their suffering is coming from their own mind, right? For us, we have the luxury of recognizing those two things can be true at the same time. That my circumstances may be difficult, then causing me physical distress and suffering, yet I am compounding that by the way I react to it, right? So we have that luxury, not everyone does. And so we have to find that balance. But you're 100% correct, you know.
In Buddhism compared to other religions, what is the end point? I know Buddhism is the end point. But if you take like Buddhism or Advaita, it's understood that the Atman merges with the Brahman. Here you don't believe, we don't believe in all that, right?
Right.
What happens to the consciousness in the end?
So the end point of our practice is we become Buddhas. So to become a Buddha means become a perfectly realized being who is no longer bound by samsara in any way. So you develop a level of complete independence. It's a type of never-ending bliss and happiness that is also aware of all phenomena simultaneously. And therefore, you are able to benefit others more fully because your mind is perfectly free. But you don't experience any suffering. You're totally free from all suffering.
But you continue to exist.
Yes, you continue to exist. The early Buddhist lineages, like I said, there are 4 different Buddhist philosophical schools. The early ones believed that you could achieve freedom from samsara, which is a mental state. And then when your body died, your mental continuum would also cease to exist. If you've achieved what's called nirvana, they'd call it nirvana with remainder because you still have the remainder of a coarse body. And then when that coarse body ceased to exist, your mental continuum would also cut. We say that that is not accurate. The Buddha taught that to certain schools, but his ultimate view is your mental continuum never ends. It just becomes purified until to be a perfectly omniscient mind. And so your physical continuum will end, and it can end, but your mental continuum will never end. And when you achieve those higher levels, you have full control of your physical continuum. So Buddhas choose to manifest however they want, right? The Buddha takes a body that has certain attributes as they want to. It's at their will, you know? So the physical body itself, it becomes immaterial to Buddhists. Even not just to Buddhas, to higher level as you practice. There's great stories of some of the Indian masters who always I think Dignaga is my favorite. He was at a monastery and he was supposed to go it was his job in the monastery to go herd the goats or the cattle or whatever it may be, or the sheep. Must have been goats. And he didn't do it. He was in his room meditating, and all the other monks were like, "You're a lazy bum. How are we supposed to have curd? How are we supposed to have butter? What, you shouldn't be here." And he said, "There's not enough, you don't have enough milk? Okay." And he drew a picture on the wall of a goat, and then he milked it. And he got all the milk he needed because he was able to manipulate the nature of reality. Because he said, we say that on a cosmological level, everything has these fine elements of earth, air, wind, fire. They're just put in different, different blendings. So once you're no longer confined by the limits of worldly minds, you can just milk a picture of a cow and get all the milk you need, So obviously that's a level of meditative skill that we don't have, and that shouldn't be the goal. It's like a party trick, really, right? There's a lot of what we call cities, right? Cities are types of achievements, and there are worldly cities and then the otherworldly city. Otherworldly city is Buddhahood, Siddhi, right? Sanskrit term, achievement. The worldly cities are like being able to fly, being able to move through walls, being able to cross great distances in the flash of an eye. They say that as you meditate, you can achieve those things. But you don't have to be Buddhist to achieve those. Non-Buddhists can also achieve them. They're not that special. They're very worldly, right? And so they really are party tricks. The reason you can achieve them and the reason they're useful is if you can use them as a way to help convince others to practice the Dharma. That's the only time they're useful. Otherwise, you're showing off, But there are stories like that. But so the point of that story for me here is that when your mind is refined enough, the physical limitations that we have become incidental, right? So that's the end goal, to have a perfectly realized mind that understands all phenomena exactly as it is without any obscuration at all.
Not achieving in one lifetime. So we're accumulating it over multiple lifetimes.
Correct.
How do we get back to what we're accumulating? Because when you start when you birth, you're again starting at zero problem. Or you have it, you don't know you have it.
You build up, we accumulate what's called merit and imprints. So my mind, the fact that we're all here together and we're studying the Dharma indicates that in past lives, we'd already studied the Dharma and we probably related to each other in some way. And that karma is ripening in this life to bring us closer to the Dharma. But that's why you'll see some people, you and a friend may study the same material. It could be Buddha, it could be, mathematics, doesn't matter. And one person gets it right away. Another person struggles with it and doesn't understand it. We say that shows imprints from past lives, right? So it may seem at the beginning we're all starting from zero, but you can just see in your experience how some things you try to do are very easy for you and some are more difficult. We say that's due to experience in past lives. You've created imprints from past lives and positive karma that allow some things to happen more easily and some things you have to struggle with. So in that way, the imprints are what continue from life to life, even as the body doesn't. So it is 11:40 now. I wanted to meditate before the break. Is there a break today? Okay. I'm not going to because it's too late. So let's take a 10-minute break. Then we'll come back. We'll do a little bit of meditation, and then we'll have time to wrap up and do some questions. Okay, so let's take 10 minutes until 11:52 by that clock. So 10 minutes. So take a 10-minute break, stretch your legs, get some calories in you, and we'll see you back here then. Okay, great. Thank you.
We can't hear you. You're not able to hear you. I think you're on mute or something. No, still can't hear you.
Okay, how's
Yeah,
that?
now I can.
Okay, so let's try to settle back into the space. What we're going to try to do going forward is to do meditation before the break, because this is hard to get our energy back and then settle into meditation. My own fault for just talking too much, but that's going to be the goal of going forward. But let's see what we can do. Let's just take a moment to settle into our space, to let all of the excitement of our snack kind of, stay over there. So today we're going to do a simple mindfulness meditation. And we will focus on the breath. Let's start with having a good posture. So most important is to have a balanced and secure foundation. So if you're sitting on the ground, whether that means a cushion under you or not, be nice and balanced. You want to feel like you are solid. What that means, however you have your feet, whatever works for you. If you're sitting in a chair, let your feet be not crossed, but flat on the ground. Eventually, you can even do meditation laying down if you need to. Some people do. It's difficult. It's very easy to fall asleep or get sleepy if you're laying down. So you have to find the balance of a posture that keeps you alert, but is also comfortable for your body. Most important thing for us right now is having a strong basis and foundation. That's the first part. Next is our spine. We want our spine to be nice and straight. Of course, we know our spine isn't straight, it has a slight curve, but we can visualize the spine as if it were a stack of coins, nice and straight. And this keeps our chest open, helps us breathe. It doesn't restrict our diaphragm in any way. Then we let our head rest gently where it naturally falls on the spine. So it's not lifted too high, it's not tucked down, just following this natural curve right at the top of your spine. Your hands, traditionally, the meditation mudra has your right hand on top of your left, palm up, with your thumbs just barely touching. And this is right at the level of your navel. If you want to do the traditional mudra, this is what it looks like. But just as good, let your hands rest on your thighs where they naturally fall. And that's also perfectly fine. You don't want to force them into an uncomfortable position. You'll notice if you meditate for a while, if you let your hands rest right here, the difference between this and this doesn't seem very big. But if you stay this way for an hour, it becomes very big, you know? So you just want your body to be in a natural state that isn't stressing it out. Next, we want to just put some awareness on our jaws. Let our jaws be nice and loose, not clenched. They'll probably hang open slightly. That's okay. Let your tongue rest on the roof of your mouth behind your teeth on your upper palate. This feels a little strange at first, but this helps us regulate our breathing and it helps us not accumulate saliva in our mouth. And lastly, the practice encourages us to have our eyes open, not closed. So traditionally, we say the eyes are halfway open. And your gaze is following down the tip of your nose to a space a few feet in front of you. It isn't focused, but it is open and aware. Some people, this is too distracting. And so if you need to close your eyes, you can. But we say our goal is to wake up, to become Buddhas, awakened beings. So we want to try to do that with eyes wide open. So these are the basic elements of our posture. Now the next element is our breathing. So we let our breath fall into its own natural rhythm. We don't force it. And as it does, I want you to turn your awareness to your breathing. And you can do this by following the physical sensations of your breath. So as you breathe in, you can feel the air entering your nostrils. Feel as it rises to fill your sinus cavity, go down your windpipe. Feel your chest rising as your lungs inflate. And then as you breathe out, you feel the opposite. Your chest deflates and settles. The air moves up your windpipe. It exits your nostrils. Maybe slightly warmer now than it was when you breathed in. And so let your mind follow the breath on this whole journey. And as you do, you can say to yourself, breathing in, breathing out. You don't have to, but that is just an extra tool to keep your focus. The actual object of awareness is your breathing. The labeling is a tool to help you stay there. Now, distractions will certainly arise. External distractions like sounds, smells, sights, and internal distractions like thoughts, like stories, daydreams. Whenever you become aware of these, there's no need to judge the distraction as being good or bad. And there's no need to judge yourself for having that distraction. You simply recognize that you become distracted. And you can label that distraction and then let it go, very gently returning your awareness to the object of your meditation, which in this case is the breath. Find it helpful, if you find it helpful, you can also count your breaths, breathing in one, breathing out one, and so on. And if you notice you've lost count, you just start over again. There's no goal, there's no end result. It's just another tool to help your focus. When you become aware of a distraction, you just notice that distraction. You don't have to be forceful in combating it. Recognize it and let it go, whether it be the sound or a thought. Label it distraction and turn your awareness. Just as gently as pushing a bubble with a feather, you let it go. There's no need to be forceful or aggressive. Allow your awareness to follow the natural rhythm of your breathing. Breathing in, breathing out, and stay focused on that object. No need for judgment, yourself or your thoughts. You recognize any distraction and let it go gently. Returning your focus. Now, as you're ready, I invite you to return your awareness to the room, those around you. Yeah, thank you. So that was just 15 minutes, a little less. And you can see if you don't do that regularly, how difficult even those 15 minutes can be, right? And it's good that it's difficult. That means you're doing work. If that difficulty is too distracting, then you start smaller, especially if you want to try to have a regular practice. If you say, I'm going to meditate an hour every day, you might be able to do that for a week, but you're going to get exhausted right away and burn out. But if you say, I'm going to meditate 5 minutes every day, then you can do that. And then when you can do those 5 minutes, and you may not have single pointed concentration, but you're not like overly distressed, then you say, okay, I'm going to meditate 10 minutes every day, or whatever it may be. So you can increase those sessions. From the tradition, notice the tradition is very clear about that. You know, if you do like an extensive retreat, they say the meditation sessions in your retreat should be shaped like the head of a piece of barley. So in the beginning, they're short. And then in the middle of your retreat is when your sessions are longest and you're doing the most work. But then you shorten them again towards the end of your retreat, especially if you're doing like a meditation retreat or even a tantric retreat. And it's recognizing that like you can't give 100% all the time as an ordinary being who's caught up in so much samsara that you're going to get burned out. So you find that balance to increase your practice and then calm yourself back down. Because it can be hard after a really good meditation session to then go do something else. You know what I mean? So you find that balance in and out. So the tradition is very clear on that. And it's very clear that it's hard. They say if you want to achieve shamatha, first step is to abandon your homeland. That's the first piece of instruction. And abandon your friends and family. Find an isolated place. And what it means by that, I mean, that's very clear. It says that which sounds extreme. This is look at where you are right now. How many distractions do you have? And how many obligations do you have? And how much do the people you care about genuinely surround you with attachment and anger and frustration? You have all of these things. And so those are obstacles to a practice. Now, many of us can't actually abandon those things. But by giving the instruction that if you really want to achieve Shine quickly in this life, you need to abandon them, is recognizing that try to find as most conducive conditions as possible for your practice. And then when you can develop your practice in conducive conditions, then you bring your practice to a place that are less conducive, right? So for us, what that may mean in our life is finding a spot in our house that is calm, that is small, that we can set aside just for meditation, right? Finding a place that is peaceful. If we need to close the windows to say that the distractions from the outside are too much, I can't deal with noise distractions, then it's okay to cut them out. Ideally, when your mind has some level of practice, you can be in the middle of the most crowded city and instantly have a calm mind focus on whatever you want. But it takes work to get there. And so until you're able to do that, you say, I'm going to give myself as many good conditions as possible, right? So that's acceptable. That's not a pampering yourself. That's saying, I want to progress, and these are obstacles, you know? So that's okay. It's important to try to create a regular practice that is also, it makes it easier because you fall into a rhythm. And that helps overcome that laziness that is the first obstacle once you fall into a rhythm. Another thing, it's hard in our situation here. But if you go on a retreat of any sort, whether it be a personal retreat on your own, or you go to like a group and do a group retreat, silence and stillness, like we would call it sacred silence often, is something that we encourage. So when I do a 10-day retreat, the students aren't allowed to talk the whole time. I usually have like a question, they can do question and answer, obviously, so they can talk then. And I try to give them like questions that they can go into small groups and discuss and come back at the end of the day. So they have a little bit of chance to talk, a little bit, because you're not used to having total silence for 10 days. Most of us aren't. But in general, you want to cultivate a sense of stillness outside of the actual meditation practice. So you want to create the conditions for that practice to succeed. So to go right from watching Netflix to turning it off, meditating, it's very difficult, right? And the same thing with teachings online. You know, you're sitting in front of a computer, you may be at your desk or your couch or somewhere that is very worldly, right? It's a place that you're used to doing all these worldly distracting activities. You want to create some sort of sacred presence in that space. And I use the word sacred very lightly here, just meaning a spiritual practice instead of a worldly practice, right? And so whatever you need to do to create a sacred stillness and silence around you, that will benefit your practice and your study. And so depending on your circumstances, what you have available to you, that might look different. You know what I mean? Like, when I was in college and grad school even, I didn't have enough space that I could have like a room just for meditation. Like I never had like a meditation room. I live in an apartment with like roommates. Like I didn't have a space like that. Even now I have one room that I live in, and I have my shrine and my bed and my desk and all my books are all in one room. So it's not like I can say that this is my meditation room, this is my study room, this is my library, this is my bedroom. I don't have that luxury because the circumstances don't permit it. So what I do is I try to create space that when I'm doing a practice, I don't just jump from one to the other. I try to create the psychological space, even if I don't have the physical space. If I had the physical space, I would, but you have to find that balance, right? That's one of the reasons on like a contemporary science thing, like they say that you should never watch TV in bed. Like you should leave your bed to just be for sleeping and for other kind of nighttime activities. And as soon as you bring other things, such as watching TV, to your bedroom, you create a sense of this place is not a place of relaxation, but a place of activity and excitement. And it actually can disturb your sleep cycle because your mind doesn't associate this with just sleeping. It associates it with excitement, right? So we want to create as good conditions as we can. So cultivating stillness and silence is a part of our practice. And it will improve your study and your meditation. What I think is critical is that this balance of study and meditation, they aren't separate entities, right? We do them both at the same time. I often paraphrase Tsongkhapa from his Lamrim, where he says, if you say, now is a time for study, and now is a time for practice or meditation, you're wrong. Because they both have to be happening together all the time. So what are you doing when you're meditating, when you're practicing? You're studying. You're studying your mind. You're studying your relation to the world around you. To say that this is not a type of study, this is only meditation, is limiting it. And in the same way, when you're studying, whether it be actively reading a text or whatever that type of study may be, to say this is not meditation, this is not practice, this is academic only, you're limiting it. You are putting your own shackles on your experience. So when you can say that my practice of study and meditation are always integrated, or I aspire for them to be always integrated, then each of them will be stronger, right? So that might mean if you're going to study a text, don't just sit on the couch in a comfortable place and read a text. Find a place where you're in a comfortable seat, take a moment, take a minute or two just to focus your awareness and then engage in that study, whatever it may be, Try to create a space where study is a type of meditation practice. They're not separate. That'll only increase what you get out of your study. Right? So it's lots of small things. And like I said, we have to have the expansive attitude. There's lots of little pieces that when we put them together, they create this bigger whole. And we can accept that. We're not going to have all those pieces right now, but any little things we can do to nudge us towards Buddhahood, then that is useful. Especially because we don't realize it, but we're really good, most of us, at practice, at worldly practice. We're really good at focusing on things that bring about worldly pleasure and worldly desire. We say it's like a dog with a bone. When you focus on something, you're really good at doing it. Most of us are. Or we talk about now flow states, right? That's a big thing in contemporary psychology and study, that when people are doing something they enjoy, whether it be playing computer games or whatever it may be, they get into a flow state where you lose track of time and you just are so invested in what you're doing. We do those things naturally with worldly practice, right? So now we can use that and say, okay, so I have some experience of what that is like. And now I have to convert it to my inner life and not my outer life, right? Because worldly practice and spiritual practice have different ends, right? Now we live in the world. Whatever we mean, we have to go to job, we have a family, we have school. Even, someone like me who has the luxury of living in a monastery, I still have worldly things I have to attend to, right? So I'm not saying we have the luxury of giving up our worldly life, but we use a spiritual attitude to approach our worldly activities, and then we dissolve that distinction between worldly and spiritual. Right? And I've talked about it before in my classes where I think it's possible to engage in pop culture, whether it be a novel or music or even a TV show or movie, but do it with a mind that is trying to engage in a spiritual practice, right? And there are different ways to do this. I'm sure I'll talk about it more because it's like one of my things I focus on. But the point is that we don't have to totally uproot our lives and do everything different, but we change the mindset with which we approach our practices to trying to make all of our aspects of our life a spiritual practice. Our spiritual practice shouldn't be relegated to this room. And now if it is, like that's better than nothing. I'm not going to say don't just give it up. It's much better than nothing, but it's very limited, right? If you only can have peace and happiness when you're in this room or when you're sitting on a meditation cushion, okay, I mean, again, it's better than pure chaos, but it's pretty close to pure chaos, right? So we need to try to get our meditation, our spiritual practice to bleed into everything we do. And then for some of us, that'll be easy. And for some aspects of our life, that will be easy. And for some, it'll be very difficult. And that's okay. If it was easy, we'd be Buddhists already. So it's okay. We do the best we can do. Okay, I think maybe that is good. Well, one last thing I'll say before opening up for questions if we have any. For me, I've always been attracted to kind of radical politics, right? And radical social upheaval, just because I see so many instances of the status quo causing suffering in a worldly sense, never mind spiritual sense. So I'm attracted to these radical ideas. And because of that, when I look at Buddhism, I look at the Buddhist teachings as incredibly radical. That's the language I use to understand. Because the Buddha is saying, you can be free from all your suffering. You have the capacity to be infinite, right? But the status quo, the way you're doing things, the normal way of doing things, only leads to suffering. So in that way, what our practice is trying to do is entirely disrupt our concept of what is normal. The teachings say that if you practice, specifically the mind training teachings, which are teachings that are developed, they came out of the Kadampa lineage, the early Tibetan masters following Atisha in the 11th century. Teachings focused on developing the mind of bodhicitta through totally destroying the mind of self-cherishing. In those teachings and commentaries, they say if you actually practice mind training, then ordinary people will look at you and think you're a crazy person because the way you live in the world will be so wildly different than what we're taught is normal, than what we're taught is acceptable and healthy and beneficial. Because really committing yourself to being free from suffering is totally opposite to capitalism and to the world we live in, right? So again, we live in this world. We have to be part of it. We don't have the luxury of going into the mountains, but we have to do it with minds that aren't attaching our happiness to these worldly things. So a spiritual practice is about disrupting your idea of what is normal and creating a new normal that focuses on freeing yourself and all sentient beings from actual suffering, which is a radical. I think it's world changing and revolutionary. And so for me, that's like a helpful idea. It reminds me that like my instinct to doubt the status quo and to disrupt the status quo is what the Buddha did. He was swimming against the stream, right? He wasn't taking things as they were and saying this is good because it's not good. It can be a lot better. And I don't just mean socially, which obviously is a thing, but I just mean our lives can be a lot better due to us transforming our minds, right? And then if that can be a motivation to transform our experiences and the people around us, that's great. But first, we have to do the inner work. And that's what Buddhism is teaching us how to do the inner work, to become a nampa, an inner being, a person who focuses on the inner life instead of the outer life. Okay, so I will end there for today. If you have any questions as we go forward, either about anything I talked about today or about things you might want to be interested in hearing about over the next 9 weeks. Yeah.
Sometimes we do meditative practices within yoga. The day ends up being a bit negative, right? Do feel some negativity as well certain times when we do meditative practices. So I think we need to be mindful of it and not suppress it. But what is the reason sometimes we end up feeling negative?
What do you mean feeling negative?
I think the negative thoughts come in, which probably you had non-thought, but I think the more you meditate, some of those
Yeah.
negative thoughts which is suppressed, which is much start coming.
Yeah. So when you actually focus on your mind and try to calm your mind, and you don't allow yourself to be distracted by what we call the pleasures of samsara or the perfections of samsara, then things that are bothering you all of a sudden that you've been ignoring might come to the surface, right? They might be negative experiences, things that you've been repressing, you know? And so it is the responsibility to navigate those is to, you don't run away from those negative experiences, but try to examine them and say, what about this is causing me to be unhappy or having displeasure? What about this is causing me distress? And is it the circumstance itself? Can I change something about it? And if I can't change anything about it, then I can change how I relate to it. But we have to, trying to repress it isn't helpful. So when we say we're trying to eliminate all minds of attachment and anger, that doesn't mean like I'm not going to have anger. Like that's not going to help, right? But it's saying this is causing anger. Why am I feeling angry when this thing happens? What is it about that? So instead of running away from it, we try to examine it. But it's true, it can be difficult. And you see a lot of the time, at least in the West, people go on, especially the Insight Meditation Society is a group of a Buddhist lineage that traces its origins back to like Burmese Buddhism and Theravadan traditions. And they do a lot of 10-day silent retreats. And a lot of people go on these 10-day silent retreats, never having done any practice before, and like have breakdowns because like their minds aren't ready to be in silence with themselves for that long of a time. Which one is a testament to how crazy the world is, that being silent for 10 days can be that disruptive. But two, it shows that like we just do have habits of ignoring things quite a lot. So be gentle with yourself. And if you notice those thoughts arising, ideally in a meditation session, you don't deal with it in the meditation session, if possible, because you want to stay focused. Like I said, if you go to, I know some people that try to go to meditation sessions and they have like a journal with them because they think they might get some insights during their meditation. Well, then you're not meditating, right? Like that's not meditation. If you're expecting all these great insights, then your focus is divided, right? So if you notice these negative or not negative, but harmful or painful experiences coming up during meditation, do your best to stay in that session. If you can't and you have to end the session, okay. But if you can, stay in the session. And then afterwards, you analyze them and say, where do those come from? How am I pushing them back? How am I not dealing with them? And be gentle with yourself to deal with them in a healthy way, right? So sometimes we can't confront them head on, or sometimes we need help, which is why if you have access to a spiritual friend or even a therapist or other people that you can navigate these things with, I think that's helpful, depending on the situation and what it is. You're going to have to find different techniques or approaches. But that's not an uncommon experience. I see what you mean, yeah. But then the important thing is don't judge your meditation as being bad because of that. That's a big thing. I'll be meditating and you have all these distractions and you're like, God, I'm such a bad meditator. What's the point? Don't do that. That's not helpful. Or you have like all these thoughts and they may be great thoughts. Like you may have like some sort of realization. You're like, oh, that's a good thought. Also not helpful. So you don't judge yourself and you don't judge the actual distraction or thought. You just recognize it and then leave it to, if it's something you need to address later outside of the meditation session, then you do that.
Your Honor, is there any technique of yours, your group or set for breathing to help in meditation? That is one. Second thing, thoughts. Do you agree there are dark forces like Mara or any others that Milarepa also encountered? Do you accept there are dark forces? And if so, what to do? Third,
what do you mean by overthinking this not? In meditation or outside of meditation? Okay. So as far as breathing goes, depending on the meditation practice, usually you allow your breathing to be natural. There are some meditation practices that focus on specific types of breathing where you manipulate it. There are some, and we probably will do at least one of those throughout the course of these sessions. But in general, most of the meditations, your breathing is natural, right? So that's that. As far as there being outside forces, most of the maras are actually manifestations of our inner minds that are causing distractions. Buddhism, at least Tibetan Buddhism, say there can be outside negative forces that are causing you harm, but ultimately, there's not much we can do about those things except develop minds of compassion towards them. And developing minds of compassion towards them is what helps get rid of them. Often there are some, but usually, like, whenever you The two examples I'll give really quickly. If you ever go to a highest yoga tantra initiation, right? It's usually a 2-day practice. The actual initiation occurs on the second day, and the first day is all these preliminaries. And part of the preliminaries, and again, this is different now that you go to initiations and there's hundreds of thousands of people in the audience. Traditionally, you'd have a teacher and like a small audience, maybe even smaller than this, right? Part of the preliminaries is you are advised to watch your dreams that evening, and your dreams are interpreted the next day. And you're given a thread that's usually a protection thread, and you're told to recite a certain protection mantra before you go to bed. But that mantra is a mantra associated with Maitreya, with love. It's generating a mind of love. That's what your protection against harmful forces outside of yourself is love. Or if you go to any tantra practice, there is a beginning of it where they request all those harmful forces that might be interested in disrupting this teaching to go away. And how do they appease them? By making offerings to them. You say, I'm going to make these offerings to you because I want you not to suffer. So it's not about fighting them. It's not about working against them. It's recognizing that any of these harmful forces there may be are suffering. So you develop compassion. Similarly, I have a friend who was living in Dharamsala for a while, and he was at Norbalinka Monastery. And he wasn't a monk, but he was hanging out with the monks. And the Dalai Lama all of a sudden rolled up with like a very small entourage out of nowhere. And he said, what's going on? Why is Simon here? And they're like, oh, we have some sort of demonic entity that's like causing problems here. And he's doing an exorcism. And he's like, oh. And so all the monks are like crowded around just watching. And they set him up on a throne. And like, I've been to an exorcism before, like a person. There's a monk I lived with who was possessed by a naga. So I've been to exorcisms before. And depending on the exorcism, there's like lots of ritual implements that are often used, like a skull cup and a peacock feather and all these things. And they set all these things up in front of the Dalai Lama. And he sits down at a throne and he pushes all those to the side. And he says this. And he's like 15, 20 minutes. He's just sitting there. All the ritual stuff, paraphernalia, he pushes to the side. So my friend goes to one of the Dalai Lama's attendants, who he knows. And he goes, what's going on? I thought he was doing exorcism. And he goes, oh, he is. He's meditating on compassion. And that was it. And then he got up and he left and it was done. So these ritual things, we use them sometimes because our minds aren't strong enough, right? That we need that the external things help us because our practice and our minds aren't as refined. But the actual practice is compassion. And what's compassion? Wishing for them to be free from suffering. So we don't deny the possibility and the existence of potential external forces that are causing us harm, but the way you combat them is by loving. And then lastly, overthinking is just a practice. You have to see that's when your mind is running in circles. Doing this very meditation practice helps with that because it allows you to calm your mind. And when you notice your mind running in circles, you just take a moment and say, what am I doing? I'm not being mindful. So take a 1 minute to focus on your breath, and that will calm everything around you, and then you can do it. But so this simple practice helps with that.
Lotus Sutra. Comments on Lotus Sutra.
The Lotus Sutra is a very long, extensive sutra. I'm not sure. It's a beautiful sutra, but I don't know. But you need comments on it. It's quite extensive. It can be helpful though. Anyway.
Said that it's important to have a goal when you're coming here. It just can't be to it's sort of long term and it's so hard to actually keep that in mind and come to this. I think basically what I'm coming here is to be able to still realize something more.
Yeah.
But isn't that like too far-fetched?
So no, I think
What was the question?
yeah. So in the very beginning, I said when you are engaging in this study, in this practice, we have to say what is our goal? What do we hope to get out of studying Buddhism and practicing Buddhism and Buddhist meditation? And that our ideal goal is to have this long-term goal, becoming a Buddha and helping lost living beings. But that's hard, and it feels like we're just saying those words, but that doesn't seem to impact my life. And it's much easier to say, look, my life is chaotic and I have difficulties. I want to have a relaxed mind. I want to have an open space where I can deal with the world around me in a healthy way that is productive and brings me a sense of peace, right? And so therefore, that is where my real motivation. And so the truth is, that's not wanting to suffer is a very valid motivation. wanting to learn something about my mind is very valid. All I would say is we can add on to that by learning about myself, by creating a space where I have a more relaxed mind, more calm mind, less obstacles in my life. I can be of more service to others in the short term and the long term. And so that little tweak to your motivation doesn't refuse the idea that I do want to be free from suffering, but it says that I realize that by making my life better, I can be of greater service to others. And so it's just adding on to your motivation, right? So if your motivation was, I want to come here so I can learn how to be a millionaire, well, A, you're going to be really disappointed because I can't help you with that. But even if I could help you with that, that would not be a good motivation. Wanting to be free from suffering, wanting to learn about your own mind, that's a valid motivation. It's a Buddhist motivation. But we can just try to add on to it. And, a lot of Buddhist teachings in the beginning, they feel like I'm just making things up. I'm working for the benefit of all sentient beings. Okay, what does that mean? It feels like lip service, right? But as I said, what is the meditation means? Becoming familiar with. So the more we do it, it becomes less words and more mental practice. It becomes something that indistinguishable, right? But that takes time. It takes practice. So in the beginning, you have this motivation that says, okay, I realize that like right now, like even for myself, when I first started studying Buddhism, like I said, I, on one hand, was really angry at religious institutions and I thought they were manipulative due to my experiences growing up. And on the other hand, I realized that I was in like a desperate state of not knowing how to navigate my own emotional landscape. And, when my friend died, my friend had been my choir master. I sang in a choir. I was a big part of the church I grew up in since I was 9 years old. And this was maybe my senior year of high school or something. He died. He'd been my choir master for most of my life and very important person in my life. And he died of pancreatic cancer, like very quickly and suddenly. And so when he was diagnosed, they told us about it, but none of us could go see him because he like degraded people. So I just wrote him a letter saying like how helpful he'd been in my life. And then during the memorial service, it was a huge memorial service. There were 150 singers. There were like 400, 500 people in attendance. And I was like the stage manager. So I was organizing all the stuff on the altar, all these things. And his husband, my friend's husband, asked me to read a section of that letter as part of the service. So I said, yeah, sure. And I added it to my list of things to do, right? I was like, okay. And then, so we're going through the service and his sister reads something and it's my turn to get up. And so I stand at the lectern and I realized if I open my mouth, I'm going to break down in tears because I had no way to navigate my experiences. So when I started studying Buddhism, it gave me a way to navigate those, right? It gave me a meaningful approach to see what was going on in my mind that I didn't have. So my first reason for studying Buddhism was to learn about myself. So I wasn't so unhappy and angry. But with that, I slowly added in my attempts at a Mahayana motivation, right? But the main focus was on myself because I was so upset and distraught, So that's okay. The goal is to be free from suffering, and we bring in this bigger picture as we can. We let it infiltrate, Okay. So maybe we'll end there for today. We've already gone long. I'm very good at that. I apologize. If it's any, like the only solace I get from continuously going over is that, again, not comparing myself in any way, but I've been to teachings with Khadjur Lamas of Rinpoche, where a couple of years ago, he was at Sarva, and he was giving a teaching on chanting the names of Manjushri. He was requested to give, chanting the names of Manjushri is a very common prayer. And he was requested to give a commentary on it and a lum. So a lum is just like an oral recitation of it. And it was like a 2.5 or 3 hour teaching, and he got through the title, barely. And that's it. So I'm like that's like the lineage I find myself in. It's not, Excuse me? No, he was at Sarva giving teachings at Dradi Kanzen, and then he gave a 1-day teaching at Sawa Kanzen. And it was on this. And then the next year he came back to Sarva, and then they requested it again. So that time he did a little faster version. He's like, last time we didn't get through very far. So, but my point is that, it's not a distraction, but I'm not good with clocks. Let's put it that way. So let's turn to page 36 in our gold books and our prayer books. We want to seal our practice with virtue. We want our practice to be virtuous in the beginning, middle, and end. We recognize that in the beginning, we tried to set a strong motivation, that our goal was to develop our minds and our awareness, our wisdom, so we can benefit sentient beings. By developing that motivation, we tried to make our practice virtuous in the beginning. By earnestly engaging in the teachings of the Buddha, our practice was virtuous in the middle. And now we want to seal our practice, making it virtuous at the end by recognizing that our time together today, as a result of that, we've accumulated some positive karma, some merit. And instead of keeping that for ourselves, we dedicate that to all other sentient beings. We wish that any merit we've accumulated may ripen on others, that they might experience happiness due to our actions. And so with that mind of dedication, we give away, we aspire to give away any good merit we've accumulated through our practice today. And we seal our practice in that way. And so we will recite the dedication prayer, these 2 verses, as well as the prayer for long life of His Holiness Dalai Lama. All of these 3 in English. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel of bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow. May that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. Great. Thank you so much, everyone. I appreciate you spending time with me today. So as was mentioned in the beginning, this is going to be a 9-week course, but there'll be 5 weeks on, then there'll be a little break while we all have some exams at the monastery. And there'll be other things happening at the center during those 3 weeks. So Deepti and Shanti will keep you updated to that. And then 4 more weeks going into December. So it'll be 9 weeks total with a little bit of a break in the middle. Next week, Venerable Gache will be coming for 1 week. And then after that, Venerable Keldenla and I will be coming back and forth, taking turns. So you get to meet a couple of us that we're all working together. So hopefully we can all spend some time with you. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Venerable.
So we are very grateful to Venerable Legden for beginning these wonderful winter teachings, session teachings. We're calling them winter session teachings. And yesterday with the grounds and the paths, teachings on the grounds and the paths, and today with the introduction to Buddhist meditation and philosophy. We're very grateful. The teachings were very, very, very helpful to all of us, I'm sure. And we request you to please come back again and again. Again, please join me in welcoming.
Okay.
Can
Thank
I
you.
make some announcements?
Yes, please.
Okay. There's some very small announcements for all of you.
Maybe pause this.
No, they can hear as well.
Oh, okay.
Can you all hear me?
I'm in the recording.
Okay, all right. We are looking to set up a designated phone line for Choe Khor Sum Ling. These are some center logistic issues and need your help. If anyone has a slightly used smartphone that is in good working condition and you're able to donate it to the center, we'd be very happy to receive it. Please, we've received one in the past that needed a lot of repair. So consider, we do not want to buy anything. So if you have anything that you can part ways with and donate to us, that would be our first option. So please try to see if you can do that. And the other thing is to ensure that the center continues to serve as a space for learning and refuge in Dharma for all. We've encouraged everyone to become a monthly contributor if you can. The least that you can give is also okay for us. Whatever you can give is okay for us. It's just that we bank on benefactors like you. We do not have one single big benefactor. So that really is helpful to all of us. We're trying to organize our first Founders Day in December. December 3rd happens to be the birthday of our Guru Kyabje Lama Zopa Rinpoche. So the weekend following that, we want to do a small get together and a small celebration. One of the things that Shanti is encouraging all of us to do is to organize a choir that can learn the Heart Sutra in Sanskrit and the praises to the 21 Tharas in Sanskrit. And if you're interested, please let us know. And if you sing, if you feel like you can contribute your singing voice, please join us. Anybody is okay. Thank you so much. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Can we close the meeting?
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah.